Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And we are super excited today to
Yes.
bring you our Beyond the Grave episode. So we've done this every year
Mhm.
since we started doing
Four
Beyond the Grave.
years. This is our fourth year.
Yes. And we've gotten much better about how we do it. So the first year, if you go back and you listen to when we did our Edgar Allan Poe
Mhm.
episode, it's a little rough recording wise because I had actors recording from their own homes and all kinds of places. Now I actually have them all come together. We record it all on the same mic using the same equipment, and it sounds so much better.
Well, each
So
year
this,
just gets better, we
yes.
perfect it.
So for our listeners who maybe haven't heard the past episodes, this is the actual show that we put on at the beginning of October. So it was October 4th and 5th this
Mhm.
year, for Beyond the Grave, which this year's story was based on Frankenstein. And we actually have the actors record their parts for us, and then we make the audio version. Now, this year, what is new is if you like to watch us on YouTube, there is a photographic slideshow that you can follow along with while the actors are telling their portions of the story. We had lots and lots of pictures taken this year.
Yes, it
And
was.
so, yes.
Each year is fabulous. Each year it gets better and better.
Oh, and this year, Diana
I
and
was
I
going to
were
say,
laughing because it was
yes,
going so smoothly
it's like,
that at
what
one
did we
point you were
forget?
like, are we forgetting something?
Mhm.
But I think because this was our fourth year, we've worked out a lot of the kinks finally. And we were just like, we had it, we knew what we needed to have done. And so we had it done. And so when you and I sat back and we thought, wait, what else are we supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
There wasn't. Our volunteers were phenomenal. Several of
Mhm.
them have been doing it the whole
Right.
time we've done it. So they knew what to do. So it wasn't like we had to teach them. A lot of our actors are returning actors for this,
Mhm.
or the two that were new this year, they'd actually attended the event previously, so they understood what was going to
Oh,
happen.
that's cool. Yeah.
Yes. And all of our student actors this year had done it before, at least
That's
once.
what was cool. They came back. It's not because
Yes.
they had to, they came back because they wanted to.
Especially, yeah, we had several that came back that had
Mhm.
actually graduated this past May, but because they're going to school locally, or working or doing other things, they were
Mhm.
available and they were like, we want to come back and do it again. And we said, of course.
And it
So
makes it so much easier because they're awesome kids. I mean, these kids are just plain awesome.
yes. And they put their heart into these performances. And this
Hmm.
year we changed it up a little bit. And so if you follow along on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see what the kids were actually doing in the photographs. They were enhancing what our actors were doing. Our professional actors were doing their monologues and telling their stories, but the student actors were right there with them this year instead of being separate. And they
Right.
really enhanced each scene. And there were some really good moments that they created that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I feel personally, and this was especially after I watched it in the dark for the first time, it really did bring to life what Mary Shelley had intended when she wrote her story.
Yes. Well, and it's like the kids got to interact with the adult actors, and the adult actors got to have input from the kids. So it just was, and then watching them together and then watching them before they were actually doing their thing, how the adults and the kids
Oh,
interacted
yes.
together was just, that was really cool. I enjoyed that so much.
Yeah, it was magical this
It
year
was
in that way.
magical. Yeah.
It was, we've, like I said, we've had phenomenal actors every year. They've done a phenomenal job of telling each story every year that we've
Hmm.
selected. But to have the student actors working with our professional adult actors created a magic that we, even in my head when I was picturing it as I was writing the script and putting things together, I didn't expect it to turn out the way it did. And I am so happy it worked that way. And I'm so looking forward to doing this again next year when we do
Yeah.
next year's Beyond the
And if
Grave.
people don't know, this is a fundraiser
Mm-hmm.
for Evergreen Heritage, which cares for Evergreen Cemetery and Fairview Cemeteries in Colorado Springs.
Which are the two historic cemeteries there in
Mhm.
town. And we thanked every audience that came in ahead of
Yes.
time and let them know that we appreciated. Not only did they get to come out and kick off spooky season with a fun classic piece of spooky literature,
Right.
but they were really helping to support all the efforts that go into the preservation. And as we mentioned, and we've mentioned it time and time again on the podcast, preservation is expensive when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to the cemeteries. There's a lot of costs involved that are not covered by perpetual care funds, or if it's a city run cemetery, as
Right.
Evergreen is, the city does not pay for that type of stuff. So unless the
Right.
families of individual grave sites are involved, the funds have to come from somewhere else. And a lot of time in our now very mobile society where people move on all the time, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times there's not a family member anymore left to care for these grave sites. So it falls to volunteers like Evergreen Heritage to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that these graves are cared for, that when we can repair a damaged stone, that it gets repaired, or bring back the roses
Yeah.
that were so
It's a lot.
prevalent. So yes. And in this case, also, and we talked about it, one of the big preservation projects at Evergreen right now is the chapel.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that have to go into repairing and maintaining this gorgeous chapel, which was built in 1911.
It was started in 1909 and completed in
1909.
1910.
There we go. And it's beautiful stone and wood, and there's stained glass. And we actually use the chapel for the first performance
Right.
every year. So knowing that some of these funds are going to go towards
Mm-hmm.
some of the work that has to be done there is awesome. So we want you guys as listeners to enjoy it this week.
Thank
Next
you.
week, there won't be an episode ready to go at,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you're on the East Coast, it starts at 4 a.m. East Coast time. Join us live. It's 6 o'clock Mountain
Yep.
time
On Halloween.
on Halloween, which is Thursday. So you'll still get an episode on Thursday, but you will join us live. We will have the link up very, very soon. I'm hoping by tomorrow, by the time this episode airs. I'm still working out all the kinks on how to do all of this. This is
Yeah,
new
so
to
this is
me.
the
So
first
yeah,
time we're going to be live. So God
we would,
knows what's going to happen.
right. So join us for that. Bring your favorite witch's brew, whatever that might be. We will be dressed up in, well, I'll be dressed up in costume. I don't know how you're going to be feeling because that's the day after your surgery.
Yeah, so we'll see. You
But
got to
I will
tune
be dressed in
in. You're
costume.
gonna have to tune in to see how coherent. I might just be sitting here like a corpse. I can just pretend I'm a corpse. I don't know.
That works for Halloween. So you can join us for some tricks on Diane's part, some treats on my part. We will be launching our official merchandise that
Mhm.
evening, so you'll get a chance to see our merchandise, and we will be doing some giveaways. So join us again. That will be 6 p.m. Mountain Time, which if you're in the U.S., that's 8 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific. I don't know what all the European time zones are. So if you're over in one of our other countries that follows us, just check it out. And of course, if it's too many hours into the night or something, you will be able to watch the episode
Right.
later. And then at that point, we'll have the link and everything for merchandise. So you'll get a chance to check all that out. But
Mhm.
yes, join us that night. You'll get a chance to do some Q&A with us. We're going to give away some goodies, and we're just going to have a good time and chat with all of our favorite listeners that you guys
That's
have
what,
been tuning in.
yeah, that's what we wanted to do. What better time than Halloween to celebrate all of you who have celebrate and hang out with all of you who have followed us and supported us. And we don't get to meet many of you. So I just think it'd be fun just to have everybody come in, sit in our make-believe parlor and and just have fun for Halloween.
Exactly. So now, without any further ado, please enjoy Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, starring Charles Johnson as Percy Shelley, Casper Johnson as Mary Shelley, Carol Gates as Justine Moritz, Holly Havercorn as Elizabeth Lavenzo, Chris Scarciato as Victor Frankenstein, Tim Gates as the monster, and our additional spirits are played by Quinn Malmstrom, Cass Allen, Chloe Wilkins, Rebecca Weber, Asha Hart, Nye Rogers, and Vicente Guzman.
Good evening, and welcome to Beyond the Grave, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, My name is Percy Bysshe Shelley, and I speak to you now from beyond the veil. In my brief time on Earth, I became a renowned English poet and philosopher. Growing up in a wealthy family, I rebelled against societal norms and sought to challenge conventional thinking through my writing. At 21, I eloped and later married Harriet Westbrook, but our union was marked by turmoil. In 1812, I met Mary Godwin, and our deep intellectual connection and shared passion for literature sparked an enduring love. Mary and I began an affair, and in 1814 we eloped to France, leaving Harriet behind. However, tragedy struck when Harriet drowned herself in 1816. But Mary and I soon, married afterward. Our life together was marked by both creative brilliance, if not some personal turmoil. However, my life was cut short when I drowned in a sailing accident off the Italian coast on July 8th, 1822, at the age of 29. Yet, out of love for me, Mary continued to write and promote my work, ensuring my legacy. And while I had many affairs, Mary was the true love of my life, and I could not be more proud of her as a woman, as a mother, and a writer. Tonight, you will embark on a journey through the pages of my wife's most enduring story, a story born from Mary's vibrant imagination, fueled by our passionate discussions on science, philosophy, and the human condition. Within this eerie landscape, however, the boundaries between life and death blur. So tread carefully, for in this world, the creatures of darkness await, and the living are not alone. But alas, my time in this realm has come to an end. To hearts which near each other move from evening close to morning light, the night is good, because, my love, they never say good night.
It is quite an honour to reflect on my work here, of all of the places I could find myself. In fact, my father taught me how to read and write by tracing the letters of my mother's headstone with my little fingers. I often wonder what my life would have been had I not been born to such a family. My father, William Godwin, he was a writer and later recognised as a philosopher. My mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, she is known as a trailblazer for women's rights. And so it is no singular event that, as the daughter of two persons of distinguished literary celebrity, that I should have thought of writing early in life. And as a child I scribbled, and during the hours given to me for recreation, one of my favourite pastimes was to write stories. And so my parents' values ultimately drove me to pursue my own but similar path. And of course I was blessed with the influence of intellectuals such as William Wordsworth, Thomas Paine, and John Adams. But, for all of its blessings, my life behind the pen has not been without its hardships. My father can attest to the struggles that came of my mother's untimely death, and then one of my most enduring struggles involved the woman to whom my father remarried, who could only seem to treat me as though she was viciously jealous of my relationship with her husband. And so these things left their mark. But as a teenager, I lived primarily away from them in the countryside, and I passed a considerable time in Scotland. While I did visit the more picturesque parts, my habitual residence was on the blank and dreary shores of the Tay, near Dundee. Blank and dreary I call them in retrospect. They were not so to me then. No, they were the area of freedom where, unbidden, I could commune with the creatures of my fancy. And then when I was 16, I returned to my father's home in London, and it was there that my life was forever changed. At the time, my father sought the patronage and granted some mentorship to one Percy Bysshe Shelley, hoping that the young poet's wealth could lift him out of debt and then further support his writing endeavours. What my father did not ask for and could not have anticipated was the spark of ardent passion between Percy and I. You see, I must admit, Percy was already married by the time that we met, though estranged, with one young child and another on the way. I know how it sounds, but I cannot describe the magnetism between Percy and I. We knew that our bond was undeniable, and so we fell deeply in love. So deeply that Percy did make the decision to divorce his wife, Harriet, in order to run away with me. And by the time everything was over and we were married to each other, I was just 18. As you can imagine, especially with Percy's previous wife's passing, our society's reaction was fierce. We were ostracized, shunned by friends and family alike. Even my own father, who had railed against the institution of marriage despite marrying twice himself, he could not reconcile his personal beliefs or his practices with my own scandal. And so Percy and I, we chose to flee to France and then quickly to Switzerland, if only to avoid the whispers and judgmental gazes. That summer, we met our dear friend Lord Byron to live alongside him, and we learned that he was no stranger to scandal himself. His own reputation at home had been tarnished by rumors of immorality, but even accusations of incest. After coming to know him so deeply, Percy and I found those accusations flippant at best. But in our shared exile, we had first spent our pleasant hours on the lake near the home, and sometimes wandering its dreary shores. But, as I said, it quickly proved to be a wet and ungenial summer, and incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. So, some volumes of ghost stories fell into our hands. There was The History of the Inconstant Lover, who, when he finally thought to clasp the bride to whom he had pledged his vows, he found himself in the arms of her pale ghost, whom he had deserted. And then there was, though I cannot remember the title, the tale of the sinful founder of his race, whose miserable doom it was to bestow the kiss of death on all of the younger sons of his house. Eternal sorrow sat upon his brow as he bent down and kissed the foreheads of each of the boys, who from that hour withered like flowers snapped upon the stalk. I have not seen these stories since then, but their incidents are as fresh in my mind as if I had read them yesterday. And after reading them all together, Byron, Percy, and I decided that we would all write ghost stories of our own, being poets and writers after all, just to share with each other. It was then that the idea of the modern Prometheus first began to take shape. I busied myself to think of a story to rival those that had excited us to this task, one that should speak to the thrilling horrors of our nature and to awaken mysterious fears, one to make the blood curdle and to make the reader dread to look round and quicken the beatings of their hearts. If I did not accomplish these things, my ghost story would be unworthy of its name. And so my imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind. I saw there the pale student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, begin to show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would any human endeavor be to mock the mechanism of the creator of the world. Percy was especially enchanted with the story, and with his guidance I completed an entire novel for publication, and the first edition of Frankenstein was released to the public in 1818, though initially we chose to publish it anonymously, and my name was left off as its author. Thankfully, a republication in 1821 finally bore my name on its cover. And so, in looking back on it this way, it seems as though Frankenstein was a monument to those happy days in Switzerland, certainly some of the happiest days of all of our lives. Although, as time went on, as it must, Percy and I faced many other scandals and tragedies together, and there were many that I faced alone. I remember how sorrow first flooded in when I learned that my older sister had snuffed out her own life. And those storms of anguish came again and again as Percy and I lost 3 of our little children. Only our youngest, named after his father, would survive to adulthood. And I loved being a mother, and so each loss dragged me further and further into this depression, and further away from Percy. And I know how these things caused him endless heartache as well, but it still pains me to say that Percy had many affairs, even until his death in 1822, when he drowned. Still, his memory is crowned with the best of our romance. And you may find this morbid, but I did go to some pains to preserve his heart in the pages of a poem he had written, and I've kept it safe in my desk since. In this way, he is beside me for the rest of my life. And so now, I sit here, looking on the shadows of my past, and I can say that my life has been a tapestry of love, loss, and literature. And I am ultimately proud to have woven this tapestry, thread by thread. Through it all, I've had to maintain myself in my struggle for my reputation, as well as my independence alone. So I have walked a very fine line between critical acclaim and social scrutiny. I know people whisper about my unladylike pursuits, especially my associations with radical thinkers, but I don't understand why I would shy away from speaking such truth to power. Certainly I intend for my mother's legacy to live on through me, with her commitment to justice for women, especially education. And I also intend to demonstrate the product of such an education, and I know that my other works, Matilda, Valperga, and The Last Man, they too explore the complexities of human nature, but you know it is Frankenstein which endures. Certainly Victor's creature, born from my imagination, has taken on a life entirely of his own. I consider it a testament to the power of storytelling, and perhaps a human need to confront the unknown, and to even tame it, through any creative means necessary. And so now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny to go forth and prosper. I have an affection for it, for it was the child of happy days, when death and grief were but words I had written which found no true echo in my heart.
God knows how entirely innocent I am, but I do not pretend that my protestation should acquit me. I rest my innocence on a plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me, and I hope that the character I have always borne will incline my judges to favorable interpretation where any circumstances appear doubtful or suspicious. My name is Justine Moritz, and I stand before this court, this judge, and this jury as no more than a humble servant of the family Frankenstein, whom I have served faithfully and lovingly for the past many years. I now stand accused of murdering the youngest of them, little William. I truly do not know how the event I am to relate came to pass. Alas, my heart is broken for the loss of the sweet lad, and for the sorrow his demise has caused the remaining Frankensteins. I owe my life to the family, especially the late Mrs. Frankenstein, God rest her soul, who took me from a mother who was unable to love and care for me. I was released from the bonds of abuse, squalor, and poverty, and given a home and an education by both Mr. and Mrs. Frankenstein. When I became old enough, I became a handmaid to my mistress, and loved and cared for her the way she had me. I helped care for her own children, especially little William. I was at Mrs. Frankenstein's side when she was called from this world into the next. On that mournful occasion, she died calmly. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever. Yet, that is the first sorrow that touched not only my heart, but the hearts of her dear husband and beloved children. It was at that time I took on more of the household duties. I made it my mission to ease the sorrow of the Frankensteins and take care of them the way my mistress would have. In some ways, I became a second mother to little William, who was only 8 years old. He was the pride of the entire family, so lovely and curious. His smile delighted and warmed our hearts, and his laughter rang throughout the house as only a child's laughter can. He was so gentle, so happy. I tell you all of this so you may know just how much I too love little William, how I never wished him ill or dead. My heart is broken, not only for his loss, but that I should stand accused as the one who snuffed the life from his young body, an action I could never undertake. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might have absolution. But now that falsehood lies heavier on my heart than all of my other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. I know only that on the terrible night in question, Mr. Frankenstein, his ward Elizabeth, and his 2 youngest sons, Ernest and William, went for a walk. The evening was warm and serene. I can fully imagine Ernest and William running ahead of the others and playing at tag and hide and seek as they so often did. I myself was away visiting at the home of an aunt. It was well after 9 that night when I was returning home, and I met a man from the village on the road. He was in a panic, asking if I had seen young William, as he has gone missing, and none of the family had seen him for many hours. Of course, I had no knowledge of this, but I immediately began to help in the search, calling William's name and seeking out his favorite play areas. I, like all the others, was out all night looking and worrying. Late into the night, I found myself in the barn, and, worried as I was, sleep overtook me, and so I lay to rest on a pile of straw. I slept fitfully, and my mind was plagued by a dream that soon became a nightmare. I fancied that a man leaned over me and whispered, "Awake, fairest, thy lover is near, he who would give his life but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake!" I thought I had awakened, but only to behold watery eyes in a face covered in yellow skin, stretched so that it showed the muscles and arteries beneath, and lips that were nothing more than a slash of black over gleaming white teeth. I felt myself stir with horror, but as often happens in nightmares, I was unable to scream or even run. The next thing I knew, daylight was streaming through the barn doors, and one of the maids was shaking me awake and tearfully telling me that William had been found, but he had been found dead. I was taken to the house and shown his tiny, lifeless body, at which time I fell into passionate sobs, and I had to be put to bed. It was then discovered that in my apron pocket was the brooch of Mrs. Frankenstein that William had pinned to his breast the day before. The portrait was shown to the constable, and when I could not explain how it came to be in my pocket, it was concluded that I must have led William into the woods and, in a fit of jealousy, strangled the boy and taken the brooch for myself. Now, I stand before you and ask, do you believe that I am so very, very wicked? Do you condone me as a murderer? Oh, I see that you do. and I am unable to convince you of my innocence, and that my fate will be at the end of a noose. Very well. I do not fear to die. That pang has passed. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. In these last moments, I feel the sincerest gratitude for those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of others to such a wretch as I am. I leave a sad and bitter world.
My poor guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she be convicted of crime? I relied on her innocence as certainly as I do upon my own. Our misfortune is doubly hard to us. We have not only lost that lovely darling boy, but this poor girl whom I sincerely loved. I see even more how heavily the grief encases my dear Victor. It is a fog I fear may never lift from his shoulders. I have the odd feeling that more than grief weighs on his heart, but I cannot guess at what it may be. He has spent many months away from us and from accounts related to us through friends, has spent much of that time in feverish solitude. When he first went away, his letters were frequent and full of news about all that he was learning and about his excitement at meeting and conversing with so many men of science. But as time went on, we heard from him less and less, until at last his father became alarmed and sent Victor's best friend, Henry Clairvaux, to check in on him. Upon his arrival, Henry discovered poor Victor wandering the streets of the city, feverish and raving of dangerous knowledge, ambition, and a monstrous being. With so much patience and time, Henry nursed Victor back to sanity as well as health. Knowing all of this, we worried terribly what the news of William's death would do to Victor. But he and Henry came immediately, and Victor, like myself, was unable to believe that Justine could be guilty of the foul crime for which she was accused and hanged. Her execution has brought about another change in him, and I worry he is on the verge of some drastic action. My heart aches for him. He is driven by some unseen force. But at what cost to my love? There is an expression of despair and sometimes of revenge in his countenance that makes me tremble. Dear Victor, banish these dark passions. I long to comfort him, to be his solace in these dark times, but he keeps me at arm's length, hiding behind a mask of duty and obligation. To what end? It was his mother's dearest wish upon her deathbed that Victor and I marry, and we both promised that we would. Victor wanted first to improve his education and make a name for himself before settling into domestic life, and I agreed. But as the months dragged on and Victor's health declined, I began to worry that we might never say those sacred vows. I even wondered for a time if perhaps some of his moods were less about the deaths of our loved ones, and began to fear that he was pining for a refined and elegant lady who may have won his heart while on his travels. This idea took such a hold of me that I relieved my mind by writing it in a letter addressed to him. It would not have surprised me. We were raised side by side as children and often were referred to as cousins, though we are unrelated by blood. I could understand, painful as it would be, if his heart were captured by a woman more mysterious than I, his companion from infancy. The companions of our childhood always possess a certain power over our minds, which hardly any later friends can obtain, but that doesn't always pertain to feelings of true love. Victor came swiftly to me after reading the letter and assured me there was no other woman, saying, "Sweet and beloved Elizabeth, chase away your idle fears. To you alone do I consecrate my life and my endeavors for contentment." It was then he clasped both my hands and with desperation in his voice said, "I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror. I will confide this tale of misery and terror to you the day after our marriage shall take place. But until then, I conjure you, do not mention or allude to it." Of course, in my relief to find that it was still I he loved and wanted, I promised. But this promise has been nagging at the back of my mind ever since. What could possibly be so horrid as to consume my beloved's conscience, to make him brood and want to hide away from those who love him best? This afternoon we stood before friends and family and vowed to love each other faithfully until death do we part. While we love, while we are true to each other, here in this land of peace and beauty, we may reap every tranquil blessing. What can disturb our peace? Tonight should be the happiest of nights, but as darkness has fallen, so too has Victor's spirits. He is agitated and restless. He paces from window to window, a pistol in his grip. I have been unable to calm him down, and am myself beginning to grow fearful. A presentiment of evil has pervaded my soul. What is it that agitates you, my dear Victor? What is it you fear? Oh, peace, peace, my love, he replied. This night and all will be safe, but this night is dreadful, very dreadful. These words have not brought me peace, as I cannot understand their meaning. Outside the wind is rising with great violence. The moon has reached her summit in the heavens and is beginning to descend. The clouds sweep across it swifter than the vulture and dims her rays, and suddenly a heavy storm of rain descends. Even with the fire blazing in the hearth, I begin to shiver. Victor rushes to me, wrapping a throw round my shoulder, and insists I should be tucked into bed. He promises to join me soon. Sleep does not come, and the storm outside mirrors my inner turmoil. I strain to hear the sound of Victor's footsteps, but instead I detect a faint noise near the window. My heart is racing. Suddenly the window is filled with an enormous, misshapen silhouette. My breath catches, and for just a moment, all is silent. Then...
Great God! Why am I here to relate the destruction of the best hope and the purest creation on earth? She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down, her pale and distorted features half covered by her hair. I fell senseless. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and before I became the miserable wretch you see before you now, I was once a content, nay, happy man, with his head full of ideas and a thirst to make my mark upon this world. I was very fond of books, especially those related to nature and science. I was chiefly intrigued by the writings of Dr. Aramis Darwin, who hypothesized that all life on earth began from one living filament. The idea of creation occupied my mind quite often, even when I was enjoying other pursuits. In all these fancies, however, I never once considered what happened to life when it ended, until my own heart was filled with grief at the death of my dear mother. Those first few days, without the brightness of her beloved eyes, and the sound of a voice so familiar, so dear, were hard days indeed. My father convinced me that the best way to move through my grief would be to go away to school and continue my education, as had been planned before my mother's death. It did not take long for me to immerse myself in my studies and learn from men of science, men who have penetrated the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They've discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. One night, as I strolled along the shore, a magnificent storm rolled in off the ocean. On a sudden, I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak. As the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. I was left in awe at this brilliant display of electricity and began to wonder if it could create life, just as able as it was to eliminate it. For many weeks, I had begun to devise the idea of creating a new species who would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. I rented a small cottage, which I turned into my laboratory and set to work. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. I spent long hours obsessively working over my creation. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the course of generation and life. Nay, more so, I myself became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Yet I still needed to construct a frame to receive it. Something like the human body with its networks of fibers, muscles, and veins. I collected bones, neglected at morgues with the worst reputations. The local slaughterhouses furnished most of my materials. And, on occasion, loathsome as it was to my morality, a foray into the old churchyard was necessary after a fresh burial. It was on a dark and dreary night in November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With trembling hands and a racing heart, I sparked life into the being upon my table. As the candles and circuits flickered, I beheld the creature's first breaths. Its dull, yellow eyes opened, and in that moment, my triumph turned to terror as I gazed upon its grotesque form. Its beautiful hair and teeth contrasted horribly with its watery eyes, shriveled skin, and black lips. The being I had intended to be beautiful was instead a monstrous mockery of life. I was so repulsed that I fled into the night, leaving the creature to his own devices. It was then that it made its escape, disappearing into the shadows. I happened upon my friend Henri Clerval just as he was exiting the carriage which he had arrived in with the sole purpose of finding me and assuring my father and Elizabeth that I was alive and well. Alive, yes, but this was the commencement of a nervous fever which found me for several months. During that time, Henri was my only nurse. As my health began to improve, a lingering fear took hold at the back of my mind. I had not looked upon my dreadful creation since the night I had reanimated it, and the wheels continued spinning on what happened to it. I was racked with guilt at having played God. I was blinded by ambition and desire to prove that I could do that which had not been done before. I did not stop to consider that there was more to life than just animation. Living creatures, human beings most of all, require a soul to illuminate their character, their morals. I knew that any human who crossed the path with that monster would shrink from it in terror. It could never truly be one with mankind. Worst of all came word of William's death. I knew, upon seeing his corpse, that it must have been that abomination that took him from life. But I was not able to voice this to anyone for fear that I would not be believed. And because of my cowardice, Justine, who is so pure, so innocent, was the next to die. Days before my marriage, the monster came to me. He had learned how to speak and begged of me to create a companion like himself that would not run from his hideousness. He warned that if I refused, he would seek revenge upon me on my wedding night. At first I relented and began to create a female. But as I became closer and closer to completing the second monster, I became more and more repulsed with it and myself. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate. Had I a right, for my own benefit, to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? No. And so I tore this new creature apart, limb by limb. And just as I completed its destruction, I looked up to find the original fiend in the doorway. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended on for happiness, and he howled with devilish despair and revenge. I cried, "Devil, cease! Do not poison the air with these sounds of malice!" With an angry look, it turned to leave, saying, "I go, but I shall be with you on your wedding night." I thought it would seek its revenge by attempting to kill me. But never did I dream that it meant my dear one, my only Elizabeth. And Elizabeth's demise was also my father's end, as his health and mind could not tolerate the death of another innocent soul. I am now consumed by a burning need for retribution. I will hunt the demon down and destroy it. I will track him down to the ends of the earth, and together we both shall perish. My creation has been my undoing, and I will be his!
Hateful day when I received life. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? I was born from dead flesh, sparked to life by ambition, not love. Victor Frankenstein gave me existence, but not acceptance. My first memory is seeing the repulsion in his eyes as he fled from his laboratory. Of course, in that moment, I did not know it was from me he retreated. I knew nothing at all. However, my body was designed to learn with an unnatural rapidity, and it took almost no time to learn how to use my muscles, to grasp with my hands and walk upon my legs. I knew by instinct that I must leave the building of my birth if I were to survive, and so I journeyed through the door into the nightlife of the city. I had hardly entered the square when children shrieked and a woman fainted. The whole neighborhood was roused. Some fled, some attacked, until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country. From that time, I stayed out of the sight of humans, learning to survive on berries or vegetables picked from gardens when no one was about. I slept in empty fields near streams or under the roots of trees. Sometimes in severe weather, I could take temporary refuge in an empty barn or shed. One day when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars. I was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the live embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. I felt light and hunger and thirst and darkness. Innumerable sounds rang in my ears, and on all sides various scents saluted me. But gradually I began to distinguish each object, sound, and scent for its uniqueness. As the days passed, I began to grow a fondness for the beauty of nature. I gazed with a kind of wonder, moving slowly as my path was enlightened. I fixed my eyes on it all with pleasure. As I woke to the sensations of the world around me, I began to experience a new sensation. I came to realize that I was lonely. In nature, each animal and bird had a mate. The flowers and trees grew in clumps, the vines and leaves intertwining with each other. I could not speak at this point. Sometimes I wished to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and inarticulate sound which broke from me only frightened me into silence again. One day I happened upon a small cottage, tucked snugly in the woods. Adjoining the cottage on one side was a low hovel constructed of wood and just big enough to crawl inside. It was bare, except for some clean straw, but dry from rain and snow, and gave me shelter from the wind, so I determined to make this shelter my place of refuge. I soon learned that the cottage was occupied by a family consisting of an old man who was blind but very wise, his lovely daughter, his son, and his son's beautiful wife. From the safety of my hovel, I was able to spend hour after hour observing them and learning their ways. I watched as they planted crops in their garden, cut and gathered wood, and mended their clothing. In the evenings, they would entertain one another with songs or by reading from books. By degrees, I made a discovery of still greater importance. I found that these people possessed a method of communicating by articulate sounds. This was indeed a godlike science. I began to really pay attention to how these sounds were used, and after many passings of the moon, I was able to speak as fluently as these cottagers. I developed such affection for this loving little family that I decided I would make myself known to them. By now, I could speak eloquently and had even taught myself to read from their books. My loneliness made me long to join in their music and fireside stories each evening. I was hopeful that they would be willing to look past my hideousness and welcome me as a friend. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial. Who can describe the horror of beholding me? The daughter fainted, and the wife ran from the cottage. The son darted forward, dashing me to the ground, striking me violently with his blind father's walking stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, but my heart sunk within me, and I refrained. Instead, I pulled myself up and quickly exited the cottage. Cursed Creator, why did I live? I was benevolent and good, but misery made me a fiend. I determined in that moment to find my creator and insist that he created another like myself so that I should not be lonely any longer. I traveled to his family home, where I came upon a young boy, but as soon as he saw me, he began to scream, calling me monster, an ugly wretch. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I knew what I had done was wrong, but I no longer cared. There was none among the myriads of men who existed, or would pity or assist me, and should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment I declared everlasting war against the species. I would only relent if Victor Frankenstein would consent to make a partner for me, and the two of us could exist together far from man. As repulsed as he was, he agreed. Yet on the night that he was to bring my other half to life, I watched in agony as he destroyed her. And so I sought revenge by killing his true love. Just as I vowed my revenge, so too did Frankenstein, and for these many months he has pursued me to the remotest corners of the globe, at last reaching the frozen tundras and icebergs of the Arctic. But revenge was not to be his, for Victor Frankenstein has succumbed to this frigid land and lies dead. Yet am I thought to be the only criminal, when all humankind has sinned against me? It is true, I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent. I have devoted my Creator, one who was worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I have pursued him to ruin as he lies white and cold in death. But fear not that I shall be the instrument of future mischief. I shall collect my funeral pyre and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious, unhallowed wretch who would create another such as I have been. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. Farewell!
We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really helps makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. So OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Dianne and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.